A couple of years ago, I was at kind of your typical business networking event, and I met a gentleman, an older gentleman, who had been in business for a while, and I was just introducing myself to him, and I let him know that I was in seminary, and after studying theology, I was going to go in start a business. And he's thinking, seminary, business, that must mean you're going to be a televangelist. And so I said, and I get it. Like, I understand that sometimes we have certain mindsets about what ministry is. And I kind of grew up that way. I grew up pastor's kid, much like Pastor Jeff over here. And we got Pastor Randy in the back. And the mindset was that ministry is something that takes place in the four walls of the church. And we didn't have classes like this at my church, where we help the people understand that there are more ministry opportunities that are out there beyond just going and getting an ordination, becoming certified to officiate weddings and funerals. And so you can go ahead and go to the next slide there. I want to share a little bit more about my background and kind of how I made this shift to understanding that ministry isn't just something that happens within the four walls of the church. It's everyday life. And for probably 85% of us, that everyday life is happening out there in the marketplace. And so at the time I was working in the Air Force. I was an Air Force officer stationed in Shreveport, Louisiana, not too far from here. And I was at Barksdale Air Force Base. And I kind of carrying forward that mindset about what ministry is. I was taking groups to go out and do street evangelism every Friday night for probably about a year, and leading worship at a Hispanic church, and I was a parking lot attendant because I wanted to help and serve my local church and help people, kind of welcome them into the church. I was active in the young adults group. I mean, I was doing the deal. And all the while, what I didn't really understand, because I didn't have a paradigm for it, is that this was my ministry, this Air Force base. And so I was literally driving out this gate right here on the day when God said, this is where your ministry is. It was right there on that Air Force base. And so since that time, God has called me to start a business. And so I have a publishing company. And what I understand now is that what it's all about is making disciples. And I want to talk about why the marketplace is such a great place to do that. The marketplace is a great place for Christians. And if for no other reason, because that's where Jesus spent the majority of his time. He's about 92% of his public appearances recorded in the New Testament were in a church building. No, they were in the marketplace. About 87% of the parables that Jesus told in the New Testament had a marketplace business context. And I mean, you can see, here's a picture of Jesus. Where was he? He was out there working with some business guys, some blue-collar workers, fishing, because the marketplace, first of all, where are the lost people? Where are the non-believers? They're out there in the marketplace. They're not sitting in this classroom, probably. Maybe we could, hopefully. But Pastor Randy will, I'm sure, address that at the end of the service today if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And what's sobering about this as well is that by 2050, if the trends continue, the demographic trends continue, only about 12% of the U.S. population will be attending church regularly. And when they say regularly, they mean just 2 times a week. Only 12% of the U.S. population. And not only is it where the lost people are, and that's the place where God has called us to go. If you follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And this was the picture. So if you're following, you're fishing. The fishing is happening out there on the water. It's happening out there in the marketplace, not in the port, but out there on the water. It's also where all of our fellow believers are. I mean, probably a very small percentage of us work for Houston Worship Center or work for a traditional ministry, nonprofit type position. About 85% of the Christian workforce works out there in the marketplace. And because from what I read in the Bible, the Great Commission is to go and make disciples of all nations. Where's one of the best places to make disciples? It's in the marketplace. Because, I don't know about you, but a lot of us, we don't even like our coworkers very much sometimes. I mean, sometimes it can be, and so the best and the worst comes out of us. I mean, of course, in the church as well, but in the marketplace, when you're dealing with people that you ended up, maybe you didn't necessarily choose, you can pick your friends, but you can't always pick your coworkers. And so it's a great place for God to refine us and for people to see, because I think it's kind of like an authentic showroom, if you will, of Christianity. Because we can come in here, we can put on our Christian persona, regardless of how we live during the week. But how we live during the week is what is observed by the lost world. Because they're not coming to church for the most part. They're out there in the workplace. And that's where we're called to go and be the salt and the light, and to make disciples and live in such a way is so compelling that people need to go and check out. They need to go and find out more about what we have to offer. So discipleship can actually happen in the marketplace, and it's also a more authentic showroom. I mean, if you go, does anybody sell cars in here? If you've bought a car, you go to the showroom. And, I mean, they've got those cars spick and span. I mean, they've got them waxed, detailed. They don't always tell you everything that's going on under the hood until you drive off the lot. So that's why you need to go and take it for a test drive. For Christianity, the marketplace, as far as lost people are concerned, if they're curious, do I want what these Christians have? They're going to see it on the test drive. They're going to see it in our lives out there in the marketplace. Next slide. Taking this a little bit further, I want you to know that if you're in the marketplace and you're a born-again believer, you are a royal priest. You are not you don't have a junior Holy Spirit. You're not a second-class Christian. You're not just sort of a crowd Christian. And I think that's kind of the mindset that a lot of Christians have. It's like, well, I didn't go to seminary and I didn't go to Bible school. I didn't go to All Nations. I don't have a pedigree, a religious pedigree. But you are still a royal priest, because that's what the Word tells us we are. In 1 Peter chapter 2, that you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation of people for God's own possession. That's what we are. How many priests do we have in here? Okay, we're getting there. By the end of today, we will have everybody raising their hand. But you are all priests. I heard Dan Cathy speak. Dan Cathy, if you don't know, is the CEO of Chick-fil-A, the son of the founder, Truett Cathy. And he was saying that whenever he meets with the Chick-fil-A operators, these are the people that run the local Chick-fil-A branches, he will go around the table and he will ask them, what are your career aspirations? And he says that inevitably, at least one of them will say, I want to be in full-time ministry. And he takes the opportunity to explain to them that if you're a Chick-fil-A operator, this is your ministry. That counter at the Chick-fil-A restaurant, that's your pulpit, he says. He tells them that all of those thousands of people coming through, if you want to have a mega church in your area, that's your mega church, that Chick-fil-A, with all of the people coming through there. What better opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to serve, to be the salt and light. And they made an incredible impact in our culture because of that mindset, because they understand that ministry isn't just something that happens inside the four walls of a church. So you're more than crowd Christians. You are royal priests. So that sounds a little bit theological, perhaps. What does this actually look like? What are the duties? What are the responsibilities of a royal priest? And you can go to 1 Peter chapter 2 again, as I just referenced. That's where God tells us that you are royal priests, that you are a royal priesthood as believers. It says in verse 5 that one of the duties of a royal priest is to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Does anyone offer up spiritual sacrifices in the marketplace? What does that mean? How about personal holiness? The sacrifice of personal holiness in the way that you conduct yourself with integrity in business or in your workplace. How about forgiveness? Have you ever had to forgive somebody in business or in your workplace? I mean, especially in business, or if you're a business owner and you have lost probably thousands of dollars to people that said they were going to do one thing and they did exactly the opposite. I'll attest to that. When you offer forgiveness in the marketplace, in your workplace, that is an act, that is one of the duties of a royal priest, is to offer spiritual sacrifices. One of those is forgiveness. How about financial sacrifices that you make when you give to the work of the Lord, when you give to your local church, when you give to missions, when you give to the poor? All of these are expressions of the duties of a royal priest. How about just your work itself? It says in Colossians 3:23 that whatever you do, do it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, because it is the Lord Christ whom you serve. And would you believe that the word work in all its different forms is mentioned more than 800 times in the Bible? And that's more than all the words used to express worship, music, praise, and singing combined. That's your work. Your work is an expression of adoration to God. It's an expression of your identity as a royal priest. So offering up spiritual sacrifices to God through Christ Jesus. The second duty of a royal priest is to, and this is in verse 9 of 1 Peter chapter 2 if you're following along, to proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness and into His marvelous light. The great evangelist D.L. Moody once said, of 100 men, one will read the Bible, the other 99 will read the Christian. Because you are the only Jesus that many of your coworkers are going to see. And so we have to live as you're offering up spiritual sacrifices, living that kind of life for God in the marketplace, people are going to ask questions about that. And Peter says in the very next chapter, if someone asks you about your Christian hope, always be ready to explain it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come to you and say, what must I do to be saved? I mean, you might have somebody bust into your office and ask that question, but chances are they're asking it in different ways. They're asking about the joy that you have. They're asking about, they heard that you were going on a mission trip, or they heard that you were going to help out at your church. They're asking for a reason for the hope that's within you, because there's something peculiar about you that they're fascinated by, at least. And maybe it starts with maybe it starts with frustration to fascination to I want what you have. So proclaiming the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. We are called as royal priests to proclaim the excellencies of Christ in our workplace. And that doesn't necessarily mean standing around the water cooler and pulling out your brick Bible and preaching a sermon right there, but it could mean inviting somebody out to lunch to maybe share your testimony, or just living your life in such a way, again, that it provokes that question, that people want to know, what is the reason for the hope that's within you? There's something that you have that I need. I want to talk about some myths about what is our primary mission in the marketplace. I read books about faith in the workplace and try to kind of stay in tune with what's happening in this faith at work, God at work, God at business, God in the marketplace movement is called a lot of different things. I've noticed some things that are not necessarily wrong. They're right in many cases, but they're not our primary mission, if that makes sense. The first is that there's sort of this myth that doing ministry in the marketplace is primarily about applying biblical timeless principles, such as the Proverbs. There have been books written about the business secrets from the Proverbs. See, the reason why that's not necessarily our primary mission, although the Bible is a workable guidebook for all facets of life, especially business. There is a ton of valuable insight that you can take and apply to your business or to your workplace, to the way that you lead in the workplace. But the thing is, you don't even have to be a believer to make that stuff work for you. You could be an unbeliever. You could take the principles and leave God out of it. And not, because part of being a priest is having that communion with God. It's having that relationship where you're walking with God in your business. You're walking with God in the marketplace. So it has to be about more than applying timeless truths, because then you're left with a rule book and no relationship. And that's not what God called us to. Is there wisdom for your workplace in the Bible? Absolutely. But first of all, it has to start with that identity that I'm a priest and that I have a relationship. I have more than just a book of principles and rules. I have a relationship with God. The second thing I want to point out is that there is a myth that the primary purpose of marketplace Christians is about being financially prosperous. And I'm all for prosperity. My wife and I, we pray constantly that God will bless our business, bless us financially, but that's not our primary purpose. There's got to be more ministry opportunity for a marketplace Christian than, for some churches, we have opportunities for marketplace Christians to minister. It's called offering time. There has to be more, because that's only a fraction. We only spend maybe 2 hours a week in our church. But if you're at HWC, it's probably more, but, even on Sunday morning. But our workplace and ministering throughout the entire week is not. I won't say that it's necessarily more important, because giving is part of the life of a believer. Again, it's part of our identity as royal priests, is to offer spiritual sacrifices. One of those is in the area of our finances, because where your heart is, that's where your money, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. And so it's part of it, but it's not the primary purpose. Because, we hear a lot, and I'm all for it, about the wealth transfers in the kingdom and how, God wants to use marketplace ministers, and it usually stops at, not in this church, but it usually stops at so that you can give large sums of money. And that's part of it, absolutely. But I think we're just scratching the surface of the potential of the church in the marketplace. There's another myth that says that, so we look at the statistics from Barna and the Gallup poll, and we can see all of the doom and gloom about the church and the way that the church is, a lot of Christians live just like the world, and no statistical difference and that kind of thing. And so these people will basically say that we need new forms of church. We need to basically, forget about your local church. We need to just go set up camp in the marketplace and have, workplace Bible studies, and that'll be your church. We need our local church. I mean, it's like saying, okay, I'm going to be a fisherman, like we just saw the picture of Jesus with his disciples. I'm going to be a fisherman, but I'm not going to have a port. I'm not going to have any place to bring the ship in. I'm not going to have any place to go and refit my vessel. I'm not going to have anyone else to learn from about how to do fishing better, or to just do life with. I mean, that's what the church is about. It's the port. It's not. We don't come in here to go fishing. We come in here to get ready to go fishing. And Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So if you're following, you're fishing, and if you're fishing, you're following. The other one is that there's sort of a myth that if you're going to be a Christian in business, if you're going to be a Christian in the marketplace, what that means is selling Christian-themed stuff to Christian people. So selling Christian T-shirts, and sadly, a lot of these Christian T-shirts are like, the Starbucks logo, except you look a little closer, like, that's not Starbucks. Spirit Bucks or something like that. or just, and hear me, my company, we publish Christian books. We publish theological books, but we also publish books on leadership and marketing and business and adoption and different, you're recovering from addiction, different things like that. I love what C.S. Lewis said. He said, and C.S. Lewis wrote books just for Christians, apologetics books on how to, reach the world for Christ, how to be the salt and light. But he also wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote books for a general audience. And he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, he said in essence that what we need is not more Christian books, but books written by Christians. Because if you were to come to your workplace and all you're great, you know a lot about theology and everything, but you don't know too much about your job, there's not a whole lot of excellence, like that doesn't impress people. They don't want what a Christian has if they're not good at their job. Because again, and it goes back to our identity as royal priests. And part of that is offering spiritual sacrifices, one of those being the excellence with which we do our job. So selling Christian-themed stuff to Christian people it's one business model. And maybe that's yours. Maybe you're called to make music specifically for Christians. Maybe you're called to write books specifically for Christians, or to have services that are for churches, as an example. But that's not the extent of it. That's not necessarily our primary mission. And so don't feel like if my company isn't overtly Christian with the fish on it, and where we've got Bible verses on everything, that's not as righteous. I mean, it's not, and having a company that is selling overtly Christian-themed products to Christian people is not any more righteous than having any other type of company. It's about the calling. It's about what has God called you to do in your workplace. If you're in business, what has God called you to do in the marketplace? The fifth thing here is that, and this is kind of our jumping off point here, there's sort of this myth that if you're ministering in the marketplace, that it's going to look like this, or it's going to look like this. And a lot of times what is implied is that these people, these authors, speakers, are interpreting the world through the lens of their spiritual gift. And so, as an example, if I have a pastoral heart, I feel this overwhelming burden to go. If I want to find out, anytime my coworkers are in the hospital, I want to go visit them. Or I just want to be that shepherd. I want to provide that pastoral care. I'm not necessarily trying to be very overt about leading people to Jesus. I just want to be the hands and feet and represent Him in that way. That pastoral gift, that may be the way that is expressed. And there are organizations such as Corporate Chaplains of America or Marketplace Chaplains. Now, if that's your gift, you might want to check out, and you feel called to the marketplace, you might want to go check out those ministries, because they provide an incredible opportunity for people to go right into companies and be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so if you're a CEO, and I mean, what has ended up happening is that the absenteeism goes down, the morale goes up when you know that your company doesn't just view you as a number or just sort of a cog in a gear, but that you're a person and that you have needs. I mean, that would just be one way that gift is expressed. I mean, there are many others, and we'll talk about this more in the class next week. And I have spiritual gifts assessments, because I want each of you to understand what your spiritual gifts are and make sure that you have a clear understanding of how God wants you to apply those in your marketplace. But there are many different ways that marketplace ministry might look. And for each of us, I know for me, marketplace ministry for me looks like my spiritual gift. Because God is not going to keep you accountable for using somebody else's gift. He's going to hold you accountable for using your gift. And you can go and read the parable of the talents and look at it through that lens and see what God says to you. Okay. So if those are myths about our primary purpose in the marketplace, what is our primary purpose in the marketplace? If you go to the Great Commission, what it says is to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. It doesn't say go make money. It doesn't even say go build churches. It says make disciples. The money, the churches, that's all part of it. But go and make disciples. That's what it's all about. And again, the marketplace is a great place to do that, because discipleship is all about lifestyle. It's all about doing life together and leading and showing people, demonstrating what Jesus looks like. And what's also interesting about this Great Commission is that it's a mandate to go and make disciples, not just of individuals, but of entire nations. So how do you begin to do that? And we have All Nations Bible School here, and you know, you hear about, like, I want to reach the nations, plural. Well, first we have to start with one nation, and then go to the next one. And then what? I think we have a better shot at making disciples of nations if we will start with our own industry that we're in. I mean, to me, it's even overwhelming to even think about making disciples of cities, because if you're going to make disciples of the United States, then you got to start with states, and then you have to start with cities, and then you have to start with your own community. But most of us, we spend a lot of time in the marketplace, and our industry is where God has called us to make disciples and to help our industry reflect the glory of Jesus, because that's what it's all about. It says in Habakkuk, as the waters cover the sea, let the whole earth be full of the awareness of the glory of God. I mean, God's not getting robbed of His glory. His glory is His glory. Amen. But the awareness is what can be lacking. And that's what we're called to do, is to reveal the glory of God that is unchanging to the marketplace. Why do I show this picture? This is a picture of, obviously, the Oscars. I do enjoy watching the Oscars because I think there's a lot of, for one, I think there's a lot of social commentary about kind of where we are as a culture. What's interesting is that when they're getting up and they're giving their acceptance speeches, it's almost like they're oblivious to the rest of the nation. Who they care about are not the moviegoers necessarily. Who they want to impress are the people who are in that room. When they're giving their acceptance speeches, they're thanking, I don't usually hear them thanking, thank you, Joe Schmo moviegoer. They're thanking their producer, their supporting cast. I mean, all the people that are within their immediate circle of influence and support. Those are the people that they consider their industry. And as basically the Academy is what votes and says that these are the films that we want to affirm and say this is what we want for our industry. And so every Academy Award basically is affirming that culture in that industry. And so as this industry goes, so goes nations. And that's the power of influencing your industry. And yes, some industries probably have varying levels of influence, but every industry carries, maybe you're not on the silver screen, but you're in the personal training industry, or you're in the cosmetics industry, or you're in the eyewear industry, or you're in the tech industry, or wherever you might be. Help your industry to reflect the glory of God. How do we do this? And this is where we're going to kind of wrap it up here. First of all, select an industry. And chances are you're already where God has called you, at least for this season of your life. And just decide, I'm going to pour my heart and my life into serving this industry. And when I say this industry, I mean the people in the industry, the culture. You're in effect discipling the culture. So don't, while you're working in this industry, don't wish you were someplace else. If God has called you someplace else, He will move you, or maybe it's time for you to get up and make that switch and get into the industry that God has called you to. But just decide that this is where I'm going to make an impact for Christ. And then set an example worth following. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And he was saying this to the Corinthians, who at that time did not have the Bible. He couldn't say, go read the Bible if you want to find out what Jesus was like. No, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And for many of your coworkers, they've never read the Bible, or they certainly don't read it anymore. And so the only Bible they're going to read is you. The third thing I would say is to partner with other Christians in your industry, because there are other Christians in your industry. And so don't get that complex that, oh, I'm the only one here trying to serve God. Have that shift. When Paul went to Corinth, you can read in Acts 18, he said, he was basically feeling kind of dejected and feeling like, I'm the only believer here. And Jesus speaks to him right there in the red letters and says, don't be afraid, for I have many in this city. And so there are others in your industry. And what he found out was that there is Priscilla and Aquila. There were other strong believers actually in his industry, which, by the way, Paul was in the marketplace. Paul was a tent maker. He was an entrepreneur. I mean, we could talk about that some other time. But that's just one example. Then I would say to love your industry, because you can be the most gifted at your craft, at your trade. But if we don't have love, then we have nothing. We're just a clanging cymbal. But I do want to say that if there was one thing you could take away from this, and I'm going to give out these assessments, is to use your spiritual gifts in your industry. If there was just one thing I would say, walking away from this, to take away, find out what your spiritual gifts are. If that's a pastoral gift, if that's evangelism, if that's compassion, if that's an apostolic gift, if it's worship, if it's discernment, it could be knowledge or wisdom, all of these different gifts. And I have examples, and we're going to talk about these next week, of people in the marketplace that have identified these gifts and that are using these gifts in a marketplace setting. So what industry are you called to disciple? I want to go ahead and pass these out. John, yes, John, there, sister. So bring these back next week. Make sure that you fill them out. Basically, what you'll do is tear off the back page. There's a place where you can put in your answers, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5. Go through each statement and say that number 5 is this always applies to me all the time. Number 1 is this never applies to me. And then 3 is kind of sometimes, or a little bit more neutral. All the instructions are in these pages. Make sure that you fill this out, and then it will instruct you on how to find out what the gifts are. There's a key in the back that will tell you what each line represents. And so take some time. It'll probably take you about 25 minutes or so to fill it out, which is why we're not doing it during this short time. So bring it back, and we're going to have some discussion next week and talk about what the results are for each of you, and would like for you to share examples of how for one or more of your top 3, how you've seen that play out in the workplace. So we're out of time here. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up with prayer. And by the way, Pastor Jeff, thank you for being able to be here and speak to the church. It's been a pleasure. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this church. I thank you for our pastors, that they believe, they understand the potential for impact in the marketplace, to make disciples of all nations, and that we have to be about the work of the business, of the kingdom business out in the marketplace. I pray that you would just help every person in this church, God, to just go to another level of marketplace impact and viewing their work as ministry, that everything that we do would be done for you, not just for a boss or for a coworker, but ultimately you are the boss, you are the master, you are the good father that we want to honor. And so we just do everything as working for you and for your glory. We thank you, not only that we can do it for you, but God, that you're with us. You said that, lo, I'll be with you always, even in the midst of your 9 to 5 job. So God, just empower us. We love you. Bless the service today. In Jesus' name, amen.